Okay. Can you see my slides, everybody?
Yes. Yes, we can see
Perfect.
them.
Thank you. Kristen, are you having issues with audio? Do you want to go ahead or do you want me to take over?
If you can hear me, maybe just take over because my screen is completely frozen.
Okay, yeah, your audio is a little garbled as well, so I'll take over. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the third day of Sustainable HEP. Kristen, would you mind muting? Oh, maybe I can do it for you if you're having issues. Okay, sorry about this, everyone. We've got a few technical difficulties. So yes, third day of Sustainable HEP. We've got a lovely lineup of talks this afternoon. We will basically have our plenary talk and then some submitted talks. And so if I can change my, there we go, there's the table. So yes, in about an hour and a half's time, we'll also have a healthy break and then continue on with our day. So, okay, 2 seconds. Apologies for this, everyone. So we'll be welcoming our plenary speaker. So Dr. Juan Pablo Cordero Garaya, apologies.
That's fine. Got a yes.
Garaya. Is joining us this morning this afternoon for most of you, but morning for me, to give us a talk on the sustainability of food systems and his work within that. So Juan Pablo is a data scientist with a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Manchester, and has previously worked in large international scientific collaborations such as the Dark Energy Survey and the Sky Pi collaboration. Since then, he's transitioned towards environmental research and particularly the greenhouse gas emissions from food systems and socioeconomic impacts of reducing their environmental footprint. His current research focuses on the development of open source predictive models to promote transparent food policy making. And this includes developing interactive tools such as the Future Food Calculator, which bridges the gap between researchers and policymakers. He's also currently part of the Backcasting to Achieve Food Resilience in the UK project, with the acronym BAFR-UK, where he co-develops models of in-crisis food systems and the required strategies to achieve environmental and socioeconomic goals under external shocks and crises. Juan Pablo, welcome. Thank you so much for giving this talk this afternoon. Whenever you're ready, please share your slides and go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anna and Christina. I'll start sharing my screen. I think in order for me to share, I need you to stop sharing. Thank you. No, unable to share screen. Still showing that you are showing your own screen.
So I think this is a technical issue with.
Yeah. Now I can share. Yes. So I'm sharing my slides directly. Let's see, share this one. So hopefully you're able to see my slideshow showing the first slide, the title of my presentation. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for the invitation. I will be talking today about the vision that we have constructed over the last few years in the research I've done, and putting this in context with the transition I've done from astrophysics to agri-food. So I'm talking about what my experience has been. I'll try to frame it with a bit of a more astrophysics target terminology. So this doesn't feel too out of place in a high energy physics sustainability conference. After that, I will introduce the main problematic. Why is it important to model high-throughput systems? Why is it important to have a transparent understanding of it through open source software? And then I'll just very briefly mention the comparison between the current software context in agri-food, how it compares to astrophysics and general high-energy physics. What can agri-food scientists learn from it, and how these two disciplines can cross-pollinate so they benefit from each other. So I'll be talking about first my background in astrophysics. I did a PhD working on weak lensing, so the evaluation of what's the distortion of the light of distant galaxies as a consequence of it going through the matter distribution in the universe. And I work primarily on understanding how the distribution of galaxies as a function of distance behaves, this redshift distribution, probability distribution, which is a key ingredient in understanding how these distortions of galaxies because of the underlying matter distribution correlate on spatial scales. And before that, I did a master's in astronomy where I worked with other software where I evaluated the shapes of galaxies. I was looking at galaxies in the Coma cluster. I was building CERN profiles, removing them from the image to evaluate the distortions and try to measure the merger rate of galaxies. So I've been most of my astrophysics career, I've been looking at images, looking at these massive files that show intensity as a function of space. Then I working to creating my own code to work with these pieces of data. And when I joined the Dark Energy Survey, which was it's still running, although towards the end of its life, it's a massive project. At some point, 500 plus researchers from tens of institutions across the world, everyone working on a consistent pipeline that was going to be able to go from the images obtained in the telescope through the pipeline to running a Monte Carlo simulation to identify the cosmological parameters in the model. And during this project, I was astounded by how such a massive collaboration was able to work coherently using collaborative tools. In particular, the pipeline was developed on GitHub using Python. It was a Monte Carlo simulation pipeline that had many different elements, each of them developed by many of the different contributors. And this was eye-opener in the sense that I was, for the first time, faced to these incredible collaborative effort of hundreds of scientists, all of them working coordinately to get to the most accurate, the most precise results in identifying the lambda CDM cosmological parameters. And towards the end of my PhD, I was obviously looking at what can I do with these tools that I learned. I contributed into this pipeline. I was working on the photometric redshift pipeline. So we use the colors of the image to identify the redshift or the distance to these galaxies to build this probability distribution. And we were evaluating the impacts of the uncertainty on these estimations. And I had contributed to this massive pipeline. I contributed with my module. I worked following the open source contribution guidelines, and I was very much into this world of open source software development. And I was looking what I'm going to do next. And at the same time, I've always been very interested on trying to identify how can these tools be used in other environments. So we have this massive, very efficient pipelines that can simulate tremendous data sets. And there are other disciplines that are looking at much more serious and urgent problems. Food, by the time, was something I was very interested. What's the impact of food? Everything that we eat has an impact on the environment, not just from emissions, but also from land use change, the way we use other resources, water, eutrophication of land. So I was thinking that this is a fantastic field where some of these tools can be utilized. It's not like there is not any modeling. There's no modeling in agri-food, but I thought there are so many things that we astrophysicists and physicists can bring from these very hardcore sciences and code development exercise into other disciplines. So when I was looking for my first job, I came across this project called Fix Our Food, which was looking at building a dashboard interface that modeled the effects of food systems transformations on socioeconomic and environmental impacts. The idea was to use Yorkshire, a region in the UK, as a test bed to try this model, see what data is available, and try to build these interactive models that can be used by stakeholders and can be used by researchers and can bridge the gap with policymakers. So I got the job, to my surprise, and I landed into this completely different field to astrophysics, and I built this table just to show the parallel between the two. When we talk about astrophysics and maybe high energy physics in general, we think of this very complicated system. Complicated in the sense that it has many moving parts. The pipeline that we built, or the dark energy circuit, we had many different modules that did a small bit of the calculation that was important in the grand scheme of things. It was complicated, but each part was immediately it was well identified. Astrophysics is geographically agnostic, relatively, at least. No matter where you look to the universe, you expect to see more or less the same. That's the whole cosmological principle. It is of interest to the public, but people look at this, they marvel, but it's not going to change their lives. If we find the right value for omega matter or sigma 8, it's not going to be life-changing for the vast majority of the public, and it's obviously mostly irrelevant to policy. It's a well-defined field. It's not urgent. We're not really, as society, desperate to find the solution to these cosmological problems. And most importantly, the literature is very transparent. So we take archive for granted, but this is something that doesn't exist in other disciplines. And I move into agri-food, which is this massively complex discipline, complex in the sense that we don't even know what are the pieces that are coming into play. We don't know how they interact. We have some understanding. We are part of this complex system as humans. We make it run, but from a modeling perspective, is tremendous complex, and we don't think we can begin to assess all the elements that play a role. Obviously, the challenges are localized. The food systems in Europe are not the same as the ones in America or in Asia, and research challenges depend on where you are running your agri-food models. It affects all lives. It's tremendously important. The security of people depends on us being able to correctly predict what the effects of policies are going to be. It's highly relevant. It is on the forefront of policies in many countries. It overlaps with many other fields: social sciences, geographical information systems, physics, biology. There's a massive reach of agri-food, and it is very urgent. We need to solve it now because we are seeing the consequences of our inaction the last few decades now. And finally, from a research perspective, is relatively close and opaque. We don't have, or agri-food scientists don't have anything remotely similar to what we have with the archive, where we can access the preprints of literature and be up to date with what's happening. Journals in general, relatively closed. It's difficult to find open journals to publish. It's hard to reproduce because a lot of the science is happening not at the level of at the level of peer review process that we are used to in astrophysics or physics. It's happening. Research done by governments or by private parties that are hired by governments to do the modeling. So it's difficult to reproduce and scrutinize what's going on. And this was obviously a tremendous shock when I started doing agri-food, because I thought I was going to be finding standards and a consistent way of doing things, and it turns out it's not the case. And this complexity of the food system stems from the many elements that interact in agri-food systems. We have obviously people. We produce food mostly for human consumption, also for animal consumption. But then those animals that we're feeding are, in the vast majority, destined to be food. The food system is the infrastructure. How do we produce food? How do we transport food? How do we store? How do we manage the waste that's produced from it? Products, obviously, the commodities that we quantify, and livestock. We could say, well, livestock is part of the products, but they do have their own processes, and they're live animals that have their own cycle. So there's land, which is where food production happens, and there's the impacts of producing, consuming, and wasting that food. So all of these elements interact, and it's a very non-linear system. It's very difficult to describe it by equations. A lot of the research is qualitative rather than quantitative, and these non-linearity is something that physicists are used to. Right? So we are used to tackle these highly non-linear systems. So I believe that we have the right set of skills to tackle this kind of issues. So I'll give you a bit of context on what the current problematic is. So if you look at the land use distribution in Europe, I'm using European values, although in this presentation, although most of my research is focused on the specifics of the UK, but you can see that a massive amount of land is woodland in Europe, and woodland sequesters carbon, and that's great. There's non-agricultural land, peatland, mountains where no food is produced, cities, built-up areas, stuff like that. And there's the pasture and the arable land, which is where most food production comes from. Now, if you go to the UK, the picture it's a bit grimier. There's way less woodland. The UK has, especially after industrialization, has completely gotten rid of its woodland. Most of the land is pasture for animal grazing. A lot of arable land. The UK is very advanced in terms of the coverage of land that's used for agriculture, and you can see that that the production of food results in a balance of quantities that you can see for Europe. So this is a plot that we really love showing around. This is the FAO data set showing the ingresses on the top two bars and the egresses on the rest of the bars. So you have production of animal and vegetable products. You have imports coming from different regions. This is the European Union. And these two add to a certain quantity that then gets used in different ways. So most of it goes to domestic use. A little bit, depending on the year and depending on the items, gets stored for later. A relatively small fraction is exported into the market. So you can see most of the items are in terms of weight. This is weight. Are of plant origin, even though a large fraction of agricultural land is actually only used for animal food production. The weight of it is relatively small. So we're using a lot of land to produce not so much food. Now, This plot shows utilization and how things are distributed across the different elements of the food supply. But then if you look at the emissions associated with the production of these elements, you can see that even though the animal production by weight is very small, most of the emissions, the CO2e emissions, are coming from animal production. And obviously, this is an unbalanced system in the sense that we are spending so much land to produce so little food that then produces so much greenhouse gas emissions. And greenhouse gas emissions are important if we look at these emissions numbers in context with the rest of the productive sectors in different countries. This is worldwide data showing a Sankey diagram of where the different emissions on the right are coming from. So on the left, we have the final services or the sectors, and you can see that food is between a fourth and a third of total emissions. Most of it coming from methanogenesis, so methane produced by enteric fermentation in ruminants, and some of it coming from waste, so urine and feces of animals. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas emission, so this is not showing the relative contribution by CO2 equivalent numbers. This is just weight of the relevant greenhouse gases. So you can see that this massive fraction that's coming from food. And why are emissions important? Obviously, you know that. You have seen this before. This is the climate stripes, which show the relative atmospheric temperature relative to pre-industrial levels. And you can see that on the left, this is roughly 1860 towards the right, which is, I think this figure is from 2023. You can see that in the last 50 or so years, the atmospheric temperature has increased. And this is the main symptom of climate change. This is not the full story. The full story is that climate change is causing the extremes to be more pronunciated. Average temperature is obviously a symptom of it, and we can see that the whole system is changing, food production is changing, the livelihood of humans is changing. So we are interested on tracking and knowing the emissions because it's telling us about how the system is responding and what are the urgencies of the problem that we're facing. So different countries and governments have done stuff to tackle this. They primarily through policies. The European Union through the European Environmental Law released the European Green Deal, which is the policy framework and requirements that the EU needs to achieve by a certain time horizon. So the specifics are that by 2050, the European Union needs to be carbon neutral. That means that whatever emissions are released into the atmosphere, they need to be offset by either sequestration or capture and storage of those emissions. And then the goals also that after 2050, the emissions need to be negative, because even if we reduce emissions to net zero, a warming still going to be here. The inertia of warming is still here, and we're still looking at 2 degrees over pre-industrial levels. So this is a legal requirement. The European Union has set this as a legal requirement. What are the consequences of not achieving it? It's not entirely clear, but at least the different countries of the European Union need to implement policies and need to implement measures so this is achieved. The UK has done the same through the Climate Change Act in 2008. Actually, the UK was one of the pioneers in defining these legal requirements. In the case of the UK, the reduction needs to be complete, so net zero by 2050, and it also requires that there is a partial reduction in 2030, which apparently the UK is on track to. And some other countries across the world have agreed to international agreements. The Paris Agreement has a very specific target: reduce global warming towards the end of the century to less than 2 degrees, ideally below 1.5 degrees. And some other countries, the USA has a per state policy strategy, have also implemented these strategies. And this is looking at all productive sectors. Food is one of them. You can see that if you divide the period of time between now and 2050 and see what the reduction in the different sectors needs to be. This is for the UK. You can see that in agriculture here in green is the one that's going to be producing the most of emissions. It's going to be the one that requires the most action towards the end of the period. So we have solved energy supply. We are at least on the way to solving energy supply through electrification of the transport system. But then agriculture is the last bastion of emissions that we need to reduce. And just skip over the slide. Right, so we need to follow these policy mandates. We need to construct a system that that allows us to predict what the effects of the different policies are going to be. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the different organizations and different governments follow different strategies to assess what the effects of these policies are going to be. In the case of the UK, apologies for giving so many examples of the UK, it's the one I'm more familiar with. The CCC, which is the Climate Change Committee, recommends actions based on the modeling they do, and then the Department for Rural Affairs then implements the policy or dictates the policy. And the predictions done by the Climate Change Committee are based on models they have developed themselves or models that already exist. This is software, data sets, assumptions that are scattered around the literature and are stored in DEFRA's, the Department of Rural Affairs internal database structure. But then when you want to identify how this has been done, can we reproduce these effects? These has been historically difficult to do. And this has raised the question on how trustable are these models? Can we actually believe that what they suggest is going to happen is actually true? So this is where our vision for these trustable agri-food software ecosystem comes into play. We have been advocating for quite some time to opening standards, defining standards that all software modelings follow, and we are advocating for open and documented systems and softwares and models that can be operated, can be scrutinized, can be also transparently. So what we are looking is, our vision is that of a system that has different elements that interact with each other through the use of standardized data formats, through the use of standardized assumptions. So everyone uses the same global warming potential for methane or CO2 or nitrous oxide. Everyone uses the same land use distribution data set. Everyone uses the same numbers of livestock, and there's agreement at the release and on the metadata that's been used to build this model. So I love using these analogy to Lego bricks, where you have different elements that on themselves have a function. You can plug them together, and they build something bigger that's consistent. But you don't just need the building blocks. You also need a good description of how they work. So if someone wants to implement or create a new piece of data, then can look at the description, at the pattern or the metadata description, and they can build it themselves, and the different data sets are free. So the 5 core principles of open source software development. First, it needs to be well documented and open, so you're able to inspect the source code. You're able to understand what each function does. Ideally, to be modular, that means that it can be interconnected with other data sets, and in itself, you can dissect and extract the different elements that build the model. It needs to be reproducible. If someone wants to run a similar analysis with the same data, you need to provide the tools for them to do that. It needs to be testable. Every piece of software needs to work under different edge conditions, and you need to be able to test them. And it needs to be extendable. If someone wants to add functionality to it, you need to give them the tools to do that. And in high energy physics and astrophysics, we are spoiled for options. There's so much. I was doing a brief literature review. I'm not tremendously familiar with what high energy physics does. I am familiar with what astrophysics does, and I was happily surprised to see that most of the software that is used for data analysis and for simulations is open source. In the case of astrophysics, AstroPy in the FITS file format have been the standard for decades, and no one they're challenging that structure because it works and it facilitates the work so different groups can share what they're doing with each other. Same as in high energy physics, I was happy surprised to see that there are initiatives. CERN itself has a lot of initiatives to distribute open source, to homogenize formats, and to create a structure that's easily extendable and following the open source concepts. And we have the archive, as I mentioned before. It is really a miracle that something like this exists. In agri-food, this doesn't exist, and looking at literature is tremendously difficult. You don't know in which journals people are publishing, and you rely on the word of mouth distribution of papers to know what people are doing. I'm missing. Oh no, I'm not missing anything. Right. So in agri-food, there are obviously models. The main difference, the three main difference between the models that exist in agri-food and the ones that you can find in physics. First one is that they either not open source, so you're not able to see what the code is doing. It's essentially a black box. It's not standardized. The data sets they use are only work with their own specific programs, so you cannot combine them or cross-use them, or you cannot use the output of one to use it as an input of one without significant adjustment. And finally, they're not always validated, and there's no research output coming in from them. So they're used internally by either the private sector or the different government organizations, but there's no peer review process associated with the validation of these models. And different types of models that we find in agri-food are primarily related to the scale in which they look at the system. So there's the subsystem evolution models that look at how individual aspects of the system evolve, or how much the specific crop produces, how much carbon this forest can sequester, what species do we need to force this amount of sequester this amount of carbon. It's biophysical models which look at complete systems, but on smaller scales or with limited set of inputs. Life cycle assessment models fall in this category. Evolution of systems on small scales or short time scales. And finally, the systems assessment models, which look at all of them, at all of the above at the same time. These are usually the most complex and the most difficult to research and the most difficult to find literature on. And they combine everything. They also combine. They mix the human behavior aspect, which is tremendously difficult to model. So coming back to the comparison between astrophysics and agri-food. In astrophysics and physics, there's a shared file format. Everyone is using approximately the same file format, whilst in agri-food, there's no standard. People do their models in Excel spreadsheets. People do their models as toolkits that are used and outside of a computational environment, or the geographical information systems have a myriad of different formats they can use. Most of astrophysics software is open source. Not all of it, but most of it is open source, or at least there are open source options to some of the software that's closed. I think most of the closed software is pipelines for reduction of data coming from specific telescopes, but most of the time it's very well documented. In agri-food, it's mostly closed. You have no idea how the ones I showed before work. DSSAT, which is a crop yield model, is pretty much a black box carbine, which looks at the evolution of forest and sequestration as a function of time. The documentation is open, but the model and the code is closed and accessible on request. AppSim, which is the default standard for farm modeling and yields, intra-farm modeling's input-output. It's a commercial solution that you need to pay to get access. Magic, which is the model that has been used to evaluate the temperature anomalies, a function of emissions used by the IPCC, has only gone open source partially very recently. The latest model is still not open source. So you can see that all of these are definitely not easy to access, not easy to dissect, and definitely not intercompatible with each other. So mostly closed. There's little or no validation in agri-food, at least on the large scale models that are used for policy. The baselines are scenario dependent. That means that whatever baseline you use to compare your results or to see the evolution depend widely on the combination of phenomena that you believe is going to happen during the duration of your time horizon. And those scenarios themselves are not usually easily accessible. And obviously, it's very dependent on the context. So running a model here in the UK is not the same as running it with the data from the European Union, because the way things are quantified is different. The classes of land used for the datasets in the European Union is different. The assumptions on climate and land and different geographical aspects is completely different. So this is something astrophysics doesn't suffer from. The main key points from this that the people that do the policymakers see these conflicting numbers coming from different models and then end up recommending policies that try to cover all the bases instead of looking at a more realistic model. Reproducibility is limited, so if you want to do research on the models, you need to redo everything yourself, and you're very likely to get different results because you don't have access to all the information. That results in limited trust. What model do we trust? So who got it right? Do we trust any of these, or do we keep doing what we have been doing? Because so far it's kind of working, even though it's actually not. And the main problem is that these models can become political instruments. So depending on who's in charge and what their agenda is, you might choose the model that suits your conclusions. So this is just a description of comparison in agri-food. Last 2 minutes, I'll talk what we're doing, what we're actually doing. I just wanted to give you a brief of the current scenario. We are working on developing these open source tools that congregate different models and are able to run pipelines with all of them at the same time. So we have created AgriFoodPy, which is an open source Python package to handle different food data and models. So it introduces a standardized land use format, a standardized way of quantifying emissions using standard open source data structures. So we use XArray to describe the different elements of the food system. it is able to manage end-to-end simulations, connecting different sources of data. So we have been working on building wrappers around some of the models I showed you a couple of slides ago. So intra-farm simulations, large-scale country-level land use simulations. We are building a framework that's able to connect all of this into a single system that doesn't require you to have to build the interconnections or build the translation layers between the different data sets and models. So it's an interoperability layer that allows you to build end-to-end simulations. All of it is completely documented, is open source, so you can check the GitHub repository if you want to be involved, if you want to collaborate, if you want to contribute. It's an open source project, so anyone can create issues or make pull requests. And this is our first effort at trying to identify how to connect the different models that are out there. And we are using a lot of the tools and elements that we learned when we were doing astrophysics. So me and my line manager, we're both former astrophysicists that had a lot of experience with large-scale models, and we're moving that knowledge from astrophysics into agri-food. And with that, we have developed the Future Food Calculator in case you want to play with it. It is an interactive model of the UK's food system that uses agri-food by under the hood. And it is the idea is to start creating these kind of tools to show policymakers what's the effect of their policies and bridge this gap between the non-tech savvy part of the agri-food ecosystem and the people who are doing research and have experience with code development. We also have another couple of projects where we are looking at investigating the effects on biodiversity, the effects of crisis and shocks into the food system. Again, we are trying to build everything on top of these interoperability layer that we have built, this open source tool that allows us to extend the models, given that it's well documented and it's extendable and it's modular. So yeah, that has been my experience moving from astrophysics into agri-food. I hope this serves as an example from any of the scientists that are looking at how their skills can solidify and what they can move into if they feel like their skills can be used for something else. Physics, astrophysics is wonderful. I wish I could go back, but I see that what I'm doing here matters, and that the tools that I got when I was doing astrophysics are very useful and very welcome in this field. So happy to get any questions about what my experience has been or the current challenges. And if you want to contact me, you can find me on the participants list in case you have interest in maybe following the same transition I did. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for this interesting talk. It's really good to see where the skills are really useful and how they can make a real impact. Now I would like to know if there's any questions. Okay, I actually had one that was, so the models that you described, they are not as much, let's say, differential equations, or how can I imagine the different food system models to work? Because you mentioned it at the start, so I got a bit curious.
Right. So I would say most models in agri-food are input-output models. So typically related to a common model where you have the input transformations, you have the input commodities, you have the input resources, and then you run an evolution based on how those interact. There is a lot of nonlinear modeling using differential equations, specifically on adoption curves for certain policies. So how fast do we react to a policy being implemented? How do we actually adopt it? how fast or how slow it needs to be applied. In those cases, there's a lot of feedback and reinforcement coming from how the different elements of the system react. So, or differential questions, but most of the models are input-output based.
Okay, thank you. I see Jan has a question.
Yes, thank you for this interesting talk, and you would have fit it perfectly in the panel yesterday. I was wondering now, so the tool seems to be super efficient and very easy to use. Do you know if it's being actually used by, for instance, policymakers or other people in the field to actually improve on their decision making?
Yep. Three examples of how this has been already being used. The first one is the project when this was conceived. We developed policy recommendations at the local authority level in the UK using the model that we developed for the calculator, particularly looking at self-sufficiency as the main target. So self-sufficiency tells you how much of what you're consuming comes from local production, which is our proxy metric for sustainability or resilience of systems. So in the first project, we used it with local authorities in the Yorkshire area of the UK to identify optimal farming transformations for improving self-sufficiency. That has trickled down into policy from some local authorities. Then at the country level, we have had 2 points of interaction with policymakers. The first one was through the release of what we call the roadmap report. So the Agri-Food for Net Zero Plus is a massive collaboration of researchers, think tankers, and policymakers and stakeholders. And we release a document where we recommend specific actions under different scenarios of stability, political stability into the future. So we identify 4 scenarios of based on the expected stability and how to achieve net zero under those scenarios using the model from the calculator. Finally, we have been approached by DEFRA, the Department for Rural Affairs in the UK and agriculture, because they want to start consolidating the data they have access to, and they are looking at how to do that. So there's a massive department, very disaggregated, a lot of people working on different things, and they're trying to identify, okay, what data do we have access to? How do we distribute that data internally, and what's the optimal way? So they are looking at standardized data formats, and they're also looking at building interactive user interface to communicate between the different groups internally. So those are the different ways we have exposed our model and how that's been actually used at the policy development level.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we have time for one more quick question, Anna.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the great talk. I'm coming at it like following Jan's question from a more like individual perspective. If you were to take this like on your tours and, for example, maybe scale it to the individual and try to understand what your land use is compared to, like, if you were to cut down 1 day of meat and this kind of thing. Have you ever tried looking at that? How reliable is that as a technique? Like, yeah.
Right. We are looking at different domain here, the intra-farm domain, which we are planning to extend to at some point. So one of our colleagues in Cranfield University is working on developing an Agri-Food Pi compatible farm operations model. I think the challenge is that data farm operations is not public in most of the countries because of how it relates to national security and how there's an economical I don't know how to say this, but there's a trading edge that you lose when you release all the information about how you operate. So obviously we rely on data that's not easily verifiable, or it's not easily cannot be validated easily. But yes, the intention is to scale in both directions, both down at the farm level and identify models that can then feed into the large scale model we have, and then extend the scale to be able to operate at larger than country levels. So our model is spatial agnostic. It's just that we have data for the UK, but in principle, it can work with any data set describing any sort of food producing land system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks very much. Thanks again for this great talk. We will now move on to start one of our session of committed talks. So we will cover sustainable detectors and material development. So this is following up from the first session that we had yesterday. Our first speaker is Ada Collins, and she will talk about a life cycle assessment of the Electron-Ion Collider.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen, so let me know when y'all can see that.
The screen is there. Yeah, now it's perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, my name is Ada Collins. I'm a rising senior over at Rhodes College, but this summer I found myself up at University of Manitoba performing a carbon footprint assessment of the Electron-Ion Collider. So for those of you who may not know, the Electron-Ion Collider, or the EIC, is the first collider that will be built in the 21st century. It's going to be replacing the relativistic heavy ion collider over at Brookhaven National Lab. At the EIC, we're going to have electron-proton and electron-ion collisions with the goal of using the electron as a probe to understand the nucleus, the force that holds it together, and the individual parton behavior thereof. Here in the bottom right, we can see a picture that demonstrates the difference between RIC and the EIC. So we can see that the EIC is going to be reusing a lot of the same infrastructure from RIC, although we will have to make some adjustments, including this new electron storage ring and a new electron injector site. You can also see really small here, we have the EPIC detector, which is one of two potential detectors. People are excited about the idea of a second one, but currently the EPIC detector is the only one that's fully fleshed out and in construction. So that's the main one that I will be considering in my analysis. I will not belabor the point of why sustainability is important for us to analyze. I think after 3 days, we're all convinced of that. But I will point out a few takeaways that I would love for y'all to have by the end of the presentation, primarily understanding where the EIC fits in the broader picture of high energy physics, as well as pinpointing where effective and also practical action can happen. And then selfishly, I will be honest, you guys are my guinea pigs because I'm presenting this here and then I'm going to be presenting it in front of the EIC collaboration next week. So if you guys have any sage wisdom or general comments on the way that I'm approaching the project or the presentation itself, I'd be very grateful if you could share those as well. Moving into the methodology and the way that I'm approaching this project, again, I'll skip over the first 2 bullet points because I think that we have a good idea of those. But the way that I'm approaching this process is essentially as kind of an external assessment, in that I'm strictly using publicly accessible information, including design reports, collaboration records, indico pages, things like that, to basically figure out, how much steel is used here, or how many people traveled from this location to this location. And from there, I'm able to scale that by appropriate carbon factors and get some sort of comprehensive idea. As I go along the way, I'm also doing my best to kind of sanity check both the initial materials that I'm starting with and my final carbon footprint, because, since we are doing this from the outside, more or less, it's important to kind of have those sanity checks along the way. One of the assumptions that I'm doing for this project is I'm trying to tease out the EIC from Brookhaven as much as possible, because I'm very interested in specifically what is attributable to the EIC rather than BNL is going to be heated during the winter regardless of whether the EIC is operational. So things like that are not included in this assessment. And then finally, I've split it up into construction phases, operation of the machine itself, and then the community efforts. So this presentation is going to be kind of a rapid fire presentation of those preliminary results, but I'd be happy to dive into more method stuff during the question section. So beginning first with construction, like I said, the EIC is reusing a lot of infrastructure from RIC, including things like the Hadron Storage Ring, and we're reusing some magnets from Argonne National Lab. But there are some construction-related things required, such as actually building the electron storage ring in the main tunnel, as well as excavating and constructing the electron injector. Obviously, we also have to construct EPIC itself, but even there, we're reusing things like the Hadron Calorimeter from S-Phoenix, which was a previous experiment over at Brookhaven. And then also, just from a practical standpoint, we do need a few new buildings and some new roads to help kind of support the infrastructure. And all of that leads up to a carbon footprint of about 37 kilotons. As we've seen, construction is definitely a big part of a carbon footprint. And here I have it compared to the electron-positron collider that was proposed for CERN. We can see that this one certainly has a higher predicted footprint, in large part because it just is a bigger machine. But I've chosen this as my point of comparison because both of these colliders are reusing a lot of infrastructure, and so it's a little bit more of a reasonable comparison than something like the FCC. In this chart on the right, we can see kind of predictably that our footprint is dominated by things like concrete, steel, and iron. These are what our most basic construction materials are, and also the things that are actually contributing to like the accelerator magnets, detector supports, and things like that. So this is the construction side of things. Again, this is kind of a one-time emission, more or less. And then we move into the operation phase, which is obviously going to be annual and every single year. So here on this slide, I have a look at cryogenics and detection. So to keep our magnets cool, we're going to be using liquid helium, which is very unsustainable to produce. But once you've actually produced it, it's pretty easy to recycle. So this 90-ton thing that I've identified here is the electricity that's required to run the recycling that we have at the EIC. And then obviously, one of the big things is going to be our detection gases. We've had some great presentations on those, so I will not dwell on them too long. Point being, PFC is bad, but unfortunately very helpful for higher nature physics. And it's this hexafluoroethane that is found in the particle identification part of our EPIC detector that will be dominating this footprint. You can see this number is much less than CERN's reported use of PFCs in 2024. That is because CERN uses other kinds of PFCs besides just hexafluoroethane, and also they have many more detectors than we do. So the number scales about appropriately. Moving on into electricity, this is going to be the biggest part of our operational footprint. I want to take us to this chart on the right that basically demonstrates BNL's fuel mix over the last 10 years. And then here in this left column, we have it averaged out. So BNL has a contract with an hydroelectric company where at any given point, they can get 15 megawatts of their power from hydroelectric. And this accounts for about half of BNL's requirements. You can see these really skinny yellow lines. These represent solar energy that come from their on-site solar farm, and then the rest of the energy comes from the New York grid. The New York grid is pretty much 50-50 between zero emission and then gas and fuel based energy. And so really when it comes to my assessment, it's only this light gray gas and fuel, which makes up about a quarter of BNL's electricity that I'm concerned with. For this number that I have here, I'm assuming a fully operational EIC with the EPIC detector. And that accounts for about 34.7 kilotons every single year. So if you remember our construction number, that was about 36 kilotons. It's as though we're building a new EIC every single year just from our electricity use. Shifting gears a little bit into the community side of things, beginning with computing efforts. So the EIC collaboration follows something called a butterfly model, which we can see in the top right. Basically, what that means is that storage and computing needs are split across different echelons. For my purposes, I'm only interested in Echelon 1 and Echelon 2, which are responsible for the majority of storage and computation, whereas Echelon 3 are mostly like home universities and institutions performing individual analysis. When it comes to computing in a distributed network like this, obviously the big deal is going to be the different regional fuel mixes. So if I'm a data center in one of these green areas, I'm going to be contributing less than one of the data centers in one of these orange or red areas. And what we can see if we kind of sum across all of those, we get about 33 kilotons due to computing every single year. Maybe not the most accurate comparison, but an interesting fact if you guys are curious. For context, training ChatGPT took about 15 kilotons. So it's as though we're pumping out like two LLMs every single year. And then finally, I know that I've been throwing a lot of information at y'all, but just to wrap up with conference travel, I specifically looked at EIC specific conferences rather than things like the Division of Nuclear Physics conference or other things that would happen without the EIC. Focusing specifically on EIC related things, we have about 15 conferences every single year with just under 900 participants flying for these different conferences. The overall effect of this travel is about 897 tons, which is not that big in the grand scheme of things, and yet it does result in about 1 ton of carbon dioxide per participant, which is notable because many of us are familiar with this like 1.1 ton per capita per year budget, which would help slow and mitigate carbon dioxide. So not carbon dioxide, global warming. So if you're an EIC physicist who travels for one of these conferences, it's, as though you're using up your whole budget right then and there. But that's the nature of any sort of international collaboration, as I'm sure we're all very familiar with, but important to keep in mind nevertheless. So just to summarize all of that into one sort of deliverable, here this 64,000 number comes from looking at operation and community, or in other words, our annual emissions, things that are happening every single year, not so much construction. Considering just this, we see that being an EIC physicist adds an extra 43.3 tons onto your yearly carbon footprint. So on the left, I have a table that just shows some regional breakdowns of average carbon footprints for citizens in these regions. And then we have what an EIC physicist from one of these places may be expected to contribute by being part of this collaboration. As you guys know, point being, it's important to understand these numbers and kind of get ahead of them while we can, because these are pretty large. So work is already being done. Within the EIC, there is a lot of research and development into hexafluoroethane alternatives. People are especially excited about the idea of pressurized argon. And then there's also a good presence of hybrid conferences or fully virtual conferences. At least 60% had clear hybrid options, and this number is likely to increase in large part due to the fact that travel funding has been decreased, which is a bummer, but we're looking for silver linings where we can. And then externally, progress is also happening. So New York and other grids are on the path to zero emission. So it's important for the EIC to keep up, both from a moral and from a practical level of things. So I hate to leave you guys on a cliffhanger of what next, but I still have about a month left of this project. So I'm just now beginning to actually quantify the efficacy of different mitigation options. And so that's my next short-term goal, is to start actually putting numbers to where can we make the most difference. Specifically, I'm very excited to look at computing because, as we can see in this chart, computing in orange does contribute significantly to our annual emissions, and it is also something that the collaboration can reasonably think about and reasonably start to address. And you guys have actually given me some really wonderful resources over the last few days to start this investigation, so much thanks to you. In terms of longer term goals, I would love for the EIC community to continue talking about and learning about sustainability, hopefully with the goal that that can kind of trickle out to the larger Brookhaven crew and continue advocating for environmentally conscious choices. I would also love to see later down the line an internal carbon footprint assessment be done during the EIC operation, because while I'm certainly giving it my best stab now, doing it several years down the line while you're actually in the operational period and maybe also a different presidential term would be very interesting and very, very helpful. And so just to be conscious of time, I will wrap it up there, but I would be happy to take any questions or feedback that y'all may have.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Are there any questions? So No, I see Hannah has a question.
Hello, thank you. Great talk, great project. I'm really interested in this. I guess my question is, how did this project come about? Like, is this internal? Is this something that you've been externally like brought in for? Like, how's it
That's a
happen?
great question. So, a little bit of both, basically. So, my professor, Dr. Wouter de Koninck, is a member of the EIC collaboration at the University of Manitoba up in Canada. And this is like, it's through like a summer research internship program. But I saw this project and I was immediately interested because I had done an internship at Fermilab like 2 summers ago, and we had somebody come in to give a talk on sustainability in high energy physics. And he had flown into Fermilab for that day and was flying out the same day, like just for that talk. And we all kind of recognized the irony in that. And so ever since then, like kind of the seed was planted, like, that'd be interesting. And so I saw that this project was happening. And I was like, what better time to investigate it than now? As far as like internal versus external, certainly being supervised by a member of the EIC collaboration has given me a lot more help than if I was doing it completely externally because he has a lot of contacts of like, oh, go talk to this computing person or talk to this spokesperson or whatever. So I've certainly been supported by that kind of network, if that's what you were asking.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And in the interest of time, I think we should move on to the next presentation. Thanks again. So our next speaker is going to speak about a novel approach to methane-based recovery or methane recovery based on the CERN gas recuperation system. So that's Ilaria Vai.
Yeah.
Ilaria,
Can you hear me?
share? Yes, we can hear you fine. Can you share your slides?
Yeah.
Yep. And we can see them. So please go ahead. It's not yet full screen.
Now it should be. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for the presentation. I'm going to present you the CH4rLiE Project, which was an Italian project based on the experience that we had on gas recuperation system from CMS experiment. And we applied it to the methane recovery in livestock environment. So CH4rLiE stands for CH4 livestock emission. We are a team of 4 between universities and research institutes. So University of Pavia with physics and chemistry department, INFN, University of Turin, and CERN, of course. And so what is the main point from which we started? Global warming that we have discussed many times during these days. We have seen the increase of the surface temperature after industrialization, and we can identify some anthropogenic causes, among which the greenhouse gas emissions. One of the interesting components, which was already mentioned early today, is methane, which has quite a huge impact as it has a higher global warming potential with respect to CO2. And in particular, what we noticed was that in Italy, at least, but it's similar graphs can be found for many regions. In Italy, 32% of CH4 emitted comes from agriculture, and in particular, the main contribution comes from enteric fermentation, which is the digestion process of cows, basically. So the project that we prepared had 3 phases, basically. The first one was the characterization of the barn environment through Compson simulation and measurements in situ. Then we performed an optimization of the methane absorbent, and we developed a capture prototype that could actually be installed in the barn. Starting from simulations, we started before with 2D simulations, which were aimed at identifying the accumulation point, if any, of the methane in the barn atmosphere. Here you can see, for example, the transversal view, the emission sources, which are basically the cows, are these points at the bottom of the barn. And here are the results that you had with one of the models that we tried. We tried also the other direction, transversal direction, and you see basically that we could notice some accumulation in the central part of the barn here. This is the normalized CH4 concentration. And then we moved to the 3D normal concentration, looking in particular at 5 points here on the axis of the barn, because these were points in which our colleagues from the University of Turin were actually performing measurements to understand the quality of the air. And so you see that there is actually accumulation of methane in some of the regions of the barn, and we studied what was actually happening on the axis of the structure. Here you see always from simulation, the normalized average of methane concentration in the different moment of the day. And the nice thing that you can see is that in these two periods, here and here, you can see a higher accumulation of methane. And as we will see in the next few slides, this can be connected to the activities that are actually taking place inside of the barn. How can we say that? Because after a campaign of simulation, we started a real monitoring of the barn. We installed 2 monitoring stations in July 2025 in a pilot barn, from which we could acquire information on environmental condition, pressure, temperature, and humidity, methane and CO2 concentration. This is a sketch on the left of the structure of the monitoring station, and on the right a picture of the real object. They were installed, and after 9 months of data acquisition, we made the first complete analysis of the data. You can see here 2 of the most interesting results, because these P1 and P4 are the same that you could see here. So basically we installed one station here, which is interesting because it is close to the region in which there is the milking area of the barn, and here P4 is inside in the middle of the barn, basically. So from the concentration analysis, we have noticed, for example, that in P1 we have a lower average concentration than in P4, while you can see in the plot in the right that if you look at the average concentration versus the time of the day, especially in P4, you find, in P1, sorry, in orange, you find exactly the same structure that we have observed in the simulation. And what is this structure due to? Well, discussing with the owner of the barn, we realized that these peaks in P1 were actually due to the movement of the animals that were moving towards the milking area to actually do the milking. And so at the higher concentration of animals in these 2 specific time frames of the day was actually reflected in a higher concentration of methane in P1. At the same time, the concentration in P4 is lower because the animals are moving from P4 towards P1 for the milking. We also noticed that if we look at the log concentration of CH4 in the two points, we see different distribution. The most interesting one is again P1, the one closer to the milking area, because as you can see from the plot, we can identify 3 components. The first one is the enteric emission during the milking operation, which is not present at all in the P4 distribution. And then we have 2 other components that has been identified with the help of the barn managers, with a so-called barn background due to the normal movements of the animals, normal movements of the people inside, working inside, plus episodic events, which could be, for example, movements of the food of the animals, the entering of machines inside of the barn to move things, and so on. While in P4, this cannot be observed because we have understood that in the middle of the barn, we can capture an average emission situation from the entire barn environment, while P1, being closer to the milking area, is more sensitive to these components. So from this, we have then moved to the development of the recovery system. We took the idea from the CF4 recovery system of the CMS cathode strip chambers, which is sketched here on the left. In this system, there is a pre-filtering module which separates from the mixture CO2 and argon. Then they use the Z10 zeolites to capture CF4, and they managed to get a high purity, which with the order of 96% of CF4 recuperated in the mixture. So we tried to redesign this to better fit to our system, starting from the consideration that from the chemical point of view, CH4 and CF4 are really similar, as you can see in the drawing of the two molecules on the bottom right. So we started with the same commercial zeolites, but in parallel, our colleagues from the chemistry department started to prepare new materials, especially developed for CH4 absorption. But the results for that analysis is not being included in this presentation. So here I will speak only about the results that we obtained with commercial zeolites. So how did we select the zeolite? So being very schematic, we started with a premixed bottle in laboratory test, which contained a small fraction of methane. We made it pass through a container which contains zeolite, and then we checked the output gas with a gas chromatograph, which is a sketch of the system that we were using in the lab. And basically what we see is this in the output, where here you have basically the two main components of air, so oxygen and nitrogen, and here you have the peak of CH4 when CH4 arrives to the gas chromatograph. So the idea of the measurements is that you make a saturation curve with the chromatograph. So basically the chromatograph is taking one measurement every 5 minutes. Until the CH4 is completely absorbed, we are in this yellow region in the plot. So in the gas chromatograph, you do not see the peak of CH4. Then we have at a certain point, we arrive at the so-called breakthrough point, which is the first moment in which the peak of the CH4 appears, and we can calculate the volume that was absorbed up to this point. Then we have a region of partial absorption, so partially the zeolite is still absorbing and partially the methane passes through and arrives to the gas chromatograph. And then we arrive at saturation, in which all the CH4 is passing through the zeolites and arriving at the gas chromatograph because the zeolite is totally saturated. So at this point, we can also calculate the total volume of CH4 absorbed with this formula. So we made this test, we measured these two numbers, breakthrough volume and the saturation volume for different kinds of zeolites, and we have compared the results. And here you have the result. So you see the same curve that I showed you before, performed with different kinds of zeolites. And basically the zeolites that gives you a curve which is more moved to the right is basically the one that is absorbing more CH4. So from these, Z5, the green one, and Z10, the black one, were the two most promising candidates for absorption. How do we select between the 5 and 10? Well, we need to understand if every time that we get the saturation, we have to throw away the zeolites, or if we can recuperate it in some way. So we started to understand which was the best zeolite to be regenerated. We tried two methods, the two classical methods, which is temperature swing absorption, in which zeolite is heated at very high temperature, and in this way it releases CH4. And also we tried vacuum swing absorption, in which the zeolite is put under vacuum, and basically the CH4 molecules are removed mechanically by the pressure. And in the plot you see, for example, the behavior of Z5 after a long cycle of saturation regeneration made with vacuum swing absorption, which is the energetically most advantageous between the two. And we have noticed that Z5 maintains a more constant absorption capacity after both TSA and VSA. So at the end, we selected Z5. So as next step was to understand if this Z5 was also able to capture methane at the percentage in which it is present in the atmosphere in the barn. Because I don't know if you notice it, but in the bottle that we were using, we were at the order of the per mil concentration, while in the barn we are at 100 ppm, if we are lucky, or not lucky, as you want to see it. So we tried to reduce the percentage of CH4 in our testing bottle and to extrapolate the behavior of absorption of Z5 with different concentration in the mixture. These are the measurements that we managed to perform, while here you have the extrapolation up to about 10 ppm, not 0 because it's not physically meaningful. The extrapolation was performed up to 10 ppm. And basically this plot is telling you that if you assume a baseline concentration of about 100 ppm within the livestock facility, roughly you need 100 kg of commercial zeolites adsorbent to capture 1 liter of CH4, which is a huge amount of zeolites, because this material is not optimized for CH4 absorption. But in any case, we were happy with our results because we could actually prove that the technology was doing what we were hoping to. What we realized was that if we want to improve the performance of Z5 working with commercial zeolites and not with custom developed materials, we could work, for example, with gas pressure. So instead of sending the air with CH4 at atmospheric pressure inside of zeolites, we could send it at higher pressure. And what this plot is telling you is that this helps in the absorption process, because the absorption process is a game between the capacity of zeolites to mechanically capture the CH4 molecules in his holes, and the ability of these molecules to move away thanks to their kinetic energy. And so if you increase the pressure of the gas, you are helping the zeolites in capturing the molecules. So one thing that we could work on in the future is, for example, to think about a system that could work with higher pressures in order to enhance the capacity of absorption. So, to summarize, what we have proved with our CH4rLiE project is that it is possible to absorb CH4 using commercial zeolites. We have seen that the zeolites Z4 and Z10s are the most effective commercially available for capturing CH4, but we are working on dedicated materials that could have, I hope, at least 1 order of magnitude higher absorption capability with respect to the commercial zeolites.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for this talk. We're a little bit over time now.
Yeah, that was my last slide. I was actually commenting the last slides.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
But I think I would like to give the floor for some questions. Thanks for this very, very interesting talk. Are there any questions from the audience? Jan.
Yes, thank you for the talk. It's nice to see the progress since the last edition. What are the plans for continuing this project?
Yeah, I was about to say that in the very last point that I couldn't read, we have submitted, CH4rLiE's ended in February 2026. We have submitted a second phase project with a new call that was recently held in Italy, and we hope that we will have the financing.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks again, and good luck with the new call of the project. So moving on, we'll stay with gases, and we'll hear of some long-term studies of eco-gas mixtures at the CERN GIF++ that we've already heard from in the context of this conference before. And the talk will be given by Giannandrea. Are you
Yes.
connected?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. Yes. Can you share your slides? And then
Yes.
please just get started. Thanks.
Okay. Can you see my slide?
Yep, fully visible. Just go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you about the long-term studies of eco-friendly gas mixture for RPC detectors at the CERN Gamma Radiation Facility. Resistive plate chamber or RPC detectors are gaseous detector made up of two parallel with resistive plates and the gas gap inside. The electrodes are connected to the high voltage, and when the charged particle passes through the detector, ionizes the gas molecule inside the gap, and the ionization process starts. Thanks to the high intense electric field inside the gas gap, an avalanche multiplication appears, and the charge developed during the avalanche is then detected as the induced signal on the readout electrodes. The RPC gas mixture, called the standard gas mixture, is mainly based on three gas components: the tetrafluoroethane or R134A in the major concentration to start the avalanche, the isobutane to quench the photons, and the SF6 to attract the electrons. I'm reporting here the exact concentration for CMS experiment, but they are very similar for the RPC detector used in the other LHC experiment. The problem with this gas mixture is that two of the three gas components, the R134A and the SF6, have a very high environmental impact. The environmental impact is quantified by a factor called global warming potential, or GWP, and higher is the GWP, higher is the environmental impact. These gases are fluorinated gases, and so they are subject to European regulation, which aims to limit and eliminate these gases from the market by 2050. Moreover, during round 3, about 50% of greenhouse gas emission at CERN were due to RPC detectors and due to leaks at detector level. For this reason, it's important to find some solution to reduce the greenhouse gases at CERN, and this can be done through the implementation of gas recuperation and gas recirculation system, and through the study of alternative gases. The last one is the way to reduce greenhouse gas emission I'm talking about. So the RPC EcoGas GIS++ collaboration is a collaboration between the main LHC experiment at CERN, CMS, ALICE, ATLAS, LHCb, and the PDT group at CERN, with the general goal to reduce the greenhouse gas emission coming from the RPC detector. In this table, you can see the geometrical parameter of all the detectors from the different experiments used for this project. The studies were conducted at the CERN Gamma Radiation Facility, or GIF++ at CERN. That is a facility which allows to simulate the background radiation expected for the high luminosity phase, thanks to the presence of the cesium source. It's also available, and we use a high energy muon beam coming from the SPS to test the detector, and the gamma background radiation is regulated to the usage of the attenuation factors that we will call ABS. Here you can see a schema of the setup. So we have the two trolleys where all the RPC detectors from the different experiments are installed. They have different distances from the source, and in orange we see the beamline that we use to test our detector. So the idea is to test the detector with new gas mixture based on the replacement of the R134A, which have a very high global warming potential, with two alternatives that are the HFO-ZE, a new gas from the hydrofluoroolefin family with a very low GVP equal to 6, plus to the addition of CO2, which is the reference of the GVP equal to 1. So the HFO plus CO2 based gas mixture that were selected for the studies are called the ECO2 and ECO3, and they contain respectively the HFO in 35% plus CO2 at 60% of concentration, and the ECO3 contains 25% of HFO plus 69% of CO2, and they both have small concentration of isobutane and SF6. So we see that there is no R134A in this gas mixture. To study the performance of the detector, we fit the experimental data with an efficiency curves. We can see in this plot the results from the APDT RPC chamber, and we have on the left the efficiency values, and on the right the current density versus the applied voltage for the three tested gas mixture, the standard gas mixture, the ECO2, and ECO3. We see that we have, for all this gas mixture, an efficiency plateau higher than 95%, but we also notice an increasement in the working point for the alternative to gas mixture, because the efficiency curves are shifted to higher voltages, and the increasement in the working point value is depending on the HFO concentration. Now, if we want to study one of these alternatives, for example, the ECO2 gas mixture, we can see here the results from the ALICE chamber flash of the ECO2 gas mixture and tested without and with different level of background radiation. We can see that with the increasement of the background radiation using the different ABS factor, we have a decreasement in the efficiency at the plateau region, but even at the highest rate, corresponding to ABS 2.2 with the green line, we have an efficiency higher than 90%. So once we have selected the gas mixture that seems to be promising, we need to test the detector with this gas mixture under irradiation over a long period, because the detector can undergo under degradation, and we need to study if it can survive to the high background rate that we will have for the luminosity phase. So for this study that is called the aging campaign, the ECO2 gas mixture was selected, the detector was flashed with this gas mixture and kept at a fixed high voltage under irradiation. So they were subject to a background heat from between 400 to 1000 Hertz per centimeter squared. The high voltage and the current are continuously monitored and stored every 30 seconds. So we can see in these plots the current density versus time that was recorded from 2022 to 2024. We can see that the current values can vary significantly from one detector to another, and it can depend from the detector position, but also on the detector status. What we are interested most to study the RPC aging is the integrated charge from the detector over time. So we calculate the integrated charge as the time integral of the current, subtracting the ohmic dark current. The target is different from the different experiment. For example, for ALICE, we have a target of integrated charge of 100 millicoulomb per centimeter square, and for CMS of 1 coulomb per centimeter square, including a safety factor of 3. In this plot, we can see the integrated charge over time, still from 2022 to 2024, for all the detector from the collaboration. Now I want to show you some results in comparison between and before and after the irradiation of the detector. So, for example, here we have the results from the ALICE chamber after integrated charge of 80 millicoulomb per centimeter square. So, testing the detector without background before and after 1 year of irradiation, we can see on the left the performance of the detector working with the standard gas mixture, and we have on the left the efficiency values, and on the right the current density versus the applied voltage. In the plot on the right, we have the same performance for the detector working on the ECO2 gas mixture. So what we can see is that in both cases, after 1 year of irradiation between 2022 to 2023, we have an increasement in the working point that is of around 100 volt for the standard gas mixture and around 270 volt for the ECO2 mixture. But there is no significant variation in maximum efficiency and currents in both cases. Now we can have a look still at the same chamber in the same condition, but testing the detector with different background rate. So on the left, we have the efficiency values versus the applied voltage, testing the detector with an average rate from 300 to 400 Hertz per centimeter square, and on the right from 50 to 100 Hertz per centimeter square. So we are comparing in this plot the performance of the detector in 2022 and in 2023 for the three selected gas mixers for the study. So the standard gas mixer, the ECO2 and the ECO3. We can see in these cases that there is no significant increasement in the working point, no significant decrease in the maximum efficiency, and increase in current for all the three mixtures, the standard, ECO2 and ECO3, after 1 year of irradiation. We also are interested in measure the resistivity of the detector because when the detector is under irradiation, we can see an increasement in the resistivity that is related to a degradation of the detector itself. So here we are reporting the values of the resistivity calculated from 2022 to 2023, and we can see that for one of the CMS chamber, we have a significant increase in the resistivity when it is calculated with the argon method. But there is a lower increase in resistivity for all the different chamber. Also, the shift in the operating voltage that we observed before can be related to increasement of the bakelite resistivity of the electrode. So the RPC detector are working in avalanche mode, and they are working with a very high environmental impact gas mixture based on the tetrafluoroethane and the SF6. For this reason, since 2019, the RPC EcoGas with collaboration has started an R&D activity to find alternative gas mixture and also to study the long-term performance of the detector under irradiation. The HFO plus CO2 based gas mixture that are called the ECO2 and ECO3 were selected and were studied over 3 years of irradiation during the aging campaign. And these two gas mixtures demonstrated to be suitable for the middle rate application and could be a good compromise to guarantee a sustainable RPC operation in the LHC condition. Also, in R&D phase is now ongoing, where the goal is to test alternative gas mixture for RPC detector with the complete replacement of the SF6 with a new alternative with a low GVP that can be also suitable for high rate application. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk with lots of results. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay. Otherwise, I had one. So basically, did I understand correctly that you're basically doing two levels of aging study? One's where you look at how well the gas continues to operate, or whether it basically breaks down and then kind of needs to be replenished, and then another one where you look at the detectors. Is this correct? Or are they not so easily distinguishable?
Yes, no, I mean the idea of the study is that you first try to test different gas mixture, and you have to choose one of these that can be suitable for the RPC operation, so that can guarantee good detector performance also with the lowest environmental impact. Once you see that one of these gas mixture could guarantee a good behavior, so you need to test it under irradiation over a long time, because you can't select a mixture and just apply it in the LHC experiment, because as I said, the detector can go under degradation with the irradiation, but also related for the gas mixture, because these gases are fluorinated gases, and when they work in a background environment, in a gamma background environment, they can break and create fluorinated atoms, ions that can accumulate on the detector. So you first select different gas mixture, then you choose one or two that you want to test over a long time under irradiation, and you hope that something good is happening.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, I don't see any in the moment. I also don't see any in the town hall, but just as a reminder, people are very welcome to also submit questions in the chat or follow up after talks with chats within the chat. Now, our next speaker is Liliana Congedo, and she will also, she will continue and deepen a little bit the discussion of aging studies with RPCs.
Thank you.
Right.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet, but we can hear you very well. The screen pops up. Not yet full screen. Please just get started. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning. I'm Liliana Congedo, and I will present the aging effects in RPC detectors operated with the eco-friendly gas mixtures, a study that we carried on with together with Luca Quaglia on behalf of the RPC EcoGas at collaboration. So let me very briefly introduce the RPC detectors. Giulia just did it before me, but they are gaseous detectors widely employed in high energy physics experiments, mainly for triggering and particle identification purposes. In particular, for example, at the LHC experiment, they cover a total area at the level of 10 to the 4 meters squared. And the main advantages of using them is that they have a low cost per unit area, high efficiency in time resolution, and easy of construction and robustness. They have been operated for several years, successfully operated with several years with a standard gas mixture that is a perfect, let's say, balance between R134A, which is the main component, with the addition of a small fraction of isobutane and SF6. And as previously mentioned by Giulia, R134A and SF6 are greenhouse gases with high global warming potential, which is a parameter quantify the contribution of a gas to the greenhouse effect with respect to the CO2, and R134A, for example, has a very high GWP equal to 1,430 and is the most present component of the standard gas mixture. As you know, the sale and the use of fluorinated greenhouse gases have been limited in Europe with the goal of reaching a minus 55% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 with respect to the 1990. Moreover, the hydrofluorocarbons, such as R134A, will be eliminated by 2050, as reported in this plot at the top of the slide. Therefore, the fluorinated greenhouse gas availability is being reduced and their price is increasing. Also, CERN is committed to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and the strategies adopted by CERN include the search for new eco-friendly gas mixtures. In particular, as reported at the bottom of the slide, a large contribution to these emissions is due to the particle detection in LHC experiments, with a large contribution due to RPCs. Therefore, RPC groups from ELIS, ATLAS, CERN gas team, CMS, LHC ship have joined effort in the RPC EcoGas at collaboration to study alternative eco-friendly gas mixtures, guaranteeing detector performance comparable with the standard one. We have tested several alternative eco-friendly gas mixtures, and we obtained very promising results with two of them, ECO2 and ECO3, that basically are obtained by replacing the R134A in the standard gas mixture with the HFO1234ZE together with the CO2. We started an aging campaign in 2022 at the Gamma Irradiation Facility, as Giulia previously presented, in which we used different RPCs. We flashed them with ECO2, and we continuously irradiated them with a background rate of several hundreds of earth per centimeter squared. After about 100 millicoulomb per centimeter squared, we observed a current increase and fluctuations. This, of course, could be due to the electron degradation. For this reason, we decided to open two of the detectors participating to this irradiation campaign, which are the ELIS and the LHC ship. The first one has a total integrated charge at the level of 100 millicoulomb per centimeter squared, while the LACB ship has been irradiated for more time and has a total integrated charge of 350 millicoulomb per centimeter squared. What we found when we opened the last, so the most irradiated one, is what you can see in this slide. Basically, we found 3 big burns of one electrode with their counterparts on the other side, with the many tips. I don't know if you can see them very well. They are reported in this picture, and these tips connect the 2 electrodes. So basically, they could create local short circuits. Moreover, we found several defects. Here I reported just 2 examples. With a white powder and sometimes also some little burns. These defects are mainly concentrated on the negatively polarized electrode. Similar defects are also observed for the ALICE RPC that is a lower integrated charge at the level of 100 millicoulomb per centimeter squared, but without big burns. In order to analyze the morphology and the chemical composition of defects and burns, we performed new analysis with scanning electron microscopy and energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. In particular, we choose some samples with a reference sample taken at the chamber corner, so basically not superimposed to the gap. So in principle, this reference sample should not be affected by the aging campaign with the eco-gas mixture. We cut and prepare the samples, and then we analyze them with the SAM. One of the results that we obtained is the spectrum. An example of this spectrum is reported at the top of this slide. In order to analyze it, we performed the spectrum cleaning by applying a custom filter in order to smooth noise, and moreover, we computed and subtract the baseline. Then we found the peaks and local minima to define the peak boundaries, and then we performed the matching between the peaks and the chemical element. In particular, for each chemical element, we split its emission lines into K and L lines and check if the peaks fall within a given energy interval of those lines. In this way, we performed the matching, and then we estimated the relative concentration of each chemical element by integrating the peak area and by dividing the element area by the total area. Now the question is what composition should we expect for the samples? In principle, the electrodes are composed of high pressure laminate coated with linseed oil. So the first is a multi-layer paper structure impregnated with synthetic resin. This means that the main elements are C, N, O, and H, but H is not observable with the EDX technique since it is too light. Moreover, traces of S, C, and Na could be found due to the additives used during the HPL production. Linseed oil is instead composed of CO and H, so basically has the same composition of HPL without N. These are the results obtained with the reference sample. In particular, on the left, you can see the picture obtained from the backscattering electrons, giving us information on material uniformity, and so the material is quite uniform, while on the right you can see the secondary electron mode picture, giving us information on morphology. At the bottom of the slide, instead, you can see the composition, and in particular, we found CN, O, and Na as expected, but with the presence of a very small fraction of F. This could, of course, be due to the gas contamination, since the composition of F-rich gas molecules, such as HFO, could add to the production of fluoride. Now, let me talk about what we found on the defects, and in particular on the white powder of one defect. As you can see, the morphology is not uniform, but analyzing different spots, we found that more than 95% of the content of the material is due to the F and Na. So the percentage of F has increased up to 70%. We also analyzed different samples with the white powder, finding similar concentrations, but different morphologies. Now, in the same sample, we also analyzed the burn, and you can see in the table at the bottom of the slide that it is mainly composed of CO and F. And also in this case, we observed different samples having various morphologies, but similar chemical content. In this slide, you can see instead a sample taken from the big burns that we observed in the chamber. And in particular, this is a tip that we analyzed. And you can see that the chemical composition is very similar to what we observed in the previous slide for the other burn. So it is mainly composed of CO and F, with the C concentrated more on the tips, in which it reaches the 70%. In conclusion, an aging test campaign of RPCs operated with new eco-friendly gas mixtures based on HFO and CO2 was carried out from 2022 to 2025 at the gamma radiation facility. And after several tens of millicoulomb per centimeter squared, we observed the current increase and fluctuations, suggesting a possible degradation of electrode surface. For this reason, we opened the two chambers, the Alice 1 with a total integrated charge at the level of 100 millicoulomb per centimeter squared, and the LACB ship 1 with a larger integrated charge equal to 350 millicoulomb per centimeter squared. And we found many defects, including the white powder, but also big burns only on the most irradiated LACB ship chamber on both electrodes. And these burns include tips that could generate local short circuits connecting the two electrodes. Further analyses have been also performed with the SEM and DDX technique, and we found a significant fraction of F in every sample, with the exception of the reference sample. We also observed that the white powder defects are composed of Na and F for more than 95%. And that the burns are instead mainly composed of CO and F. We observed these results for different samples with various morphologies. Further analyses are currently ongoing, suggesting that white powder seems amorphous, and instead burns are composed of different parts. In particular, the black visible one is amorphous, so probably carbon, and is embedded with the further phases. XRD analyses are ongoing in order to study the crystallographic structure. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very nice talk. Interesting to see these results. Are there any questions? So I have maybe a short one, and I might have missed it during the talk, but sort of the irradiation that you collected there, or sort of the aging study, how much, let's say, luminosity would this correspond to in terms of, let's say, ALICE or LHCb or even ATLAS or CMS, to get a roughly idea?
So basically, in the EcoGas Agri+ collaboration, each experiment has, of course, a different target in terms of integrated charge, because in the experimental the detectors are, let's say, exposed to different conditions. But anyway, just to have an idea, the target that wanted to be reached from ALICE was 100 millicoulomb per centimeter squared, while for CMS it is at the level of 1 coulomb per centimeter squared, but with a safety factor 3. So it is basically at the level of 350 millicoulomb per centimeter squared.
Okay, that would roughly correspond maybe to I don't know, 100 inverse femtoban, 1 inverse attoban, or sort of what are sort of the luminosities that this would correspond to? I understand this is difficult to maybe convert.
Yeah, it is not straightforward to make this conversion. What I can say is that these targets are, let's say, corresponds to several years of operation at the high luminosity LAC for each of the experiments that I mentioned.
Okay, and this is where you see these breakdowns, or the
yes. Yeah, we see the different, let's say, behavior in the case of in the case of low irradiation. We see basically only the defects. Instead, for higher irradiation, so for 350 millicoulomb per centimeter square, we observed also these big burns.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't see any question from the audience. And I'm sure everyone is happy to get like a small toilet and water break. So we'll take a health break now, and we'll reconvene a little bit later at 4:05. So 5 minutes. So we are basically 5 minutes delayed when we restart. We'll pause the recording as well, so people, yeah, it should be